Welcome, everyone, to Week 10 of the 2025 season of the Dolphins Make Me Cry podcast. Steve Giordano here, honored to host as always. And man, a lot has happened since the Dolphins played the Ravens last week, Thursday Night Football, losing 28-6, and complete just disaster of a game. I predicted it, doesn't shock me. You know, every team, even a bad team, will have that one game where they put it all together. And, you know, it was that game in Atlanta, and I was blessed to be there. It was nice to actually be in a road stadium and win a game like that, you know, specifically off of, you know, traveling to the Carolina game and having a 17-point lead there and blowing it. And, you know, coming out of that game, I did not feel confident whatsoever that they'd be able to replicate it, you know, just a few days later. You know, different matchup, different setup, Lamar coming back, the run game. Anytime you can look at this Dolphin team and you can look at the other team's strengths and our weaknesses, you can pretty much, the telltale signs are there. You know, when you want to talk about a consistent team, the Dolphins are the consistent team for all the wrong reasons. They are the consistent team that does the same dumb shit over and over and over again when it comes to, you know, mental mistakes, errors, you know, offsides, penalties, inopportune, you know, fumbles and turnovers at bad times, and just no flow and not really knowing what the hell they're doing, you know, most of the time. Plus throw in the fact that we've talked about it a million times, the lack of depth, the lack of physicality. Do you realize, Dolphin fans, that their best offensive package that they've put together all year in offensive plays have come off of putting in a sixth offensive lineman in Brunskill? They did it in Atlanta. They did it a couple plays that were effective against the Ravens, which basically tells you all you need to know, that we know that we cannot man up on that O-line and actually be effective in the run game or pass game. And it's just a sad state of affairs. So that game, complete disaster, terrible game for Tua, all the bad mistakes. You know, Lamar didn't even have to do much. You could tell that he was, you know, not ready to run around, and he also knew he didn't need to. Run game did enough. You pretty much outplayed him for the most part in the first half. It's just you had your dumb mistakes and you didn't capitalize, particularly on, you know, the field goal there before the end of the half. And then the second half was just a runaway train. Again, simple strategy. We're going to run the Dolphins over because they give up 5 yards a carry. And if the run, for whatever reason, gets taken away, and they have done it in spots, particularly obviously in Atlanta, a little bit against Cleveland, yeah, then we'll open up the pass game because we know their secondary isn't any good either. And if you're a team with a tight end that we're going to talk about with this Bills game, we can just pick them apart underneath, and they have no answer. And on top of it, when it comes to turnovers, do you know that the Dolphins have one interception this year, and I was in Carolina, Minkah Fitzpatrick? That is just pathetically sad. So the Dolphins lose in a terrible game, and please, for the love of God, next year, stop putting them on these night games, particularly Thursdays, because they're the worst. They're late, they drag on, and then we never win them. So please, NFL, put them Sunday at 1 next year. They don't deserve any primetime games. I know they'll have a couple here and there, but there ain't going to be many off of what this team has done this year. So coming out of that game, the next day's big news was, drum roll please, firing Chris Grier years and years and years too late. And now he was the first domino to fall in this mess. Now makes way right before the trade deadline, which came and went on Tuesday, where Chris Grier was fired because allegedly he did not want to make moves that Stephen Ross did that were a little bit more aggressive. And interim GM, his name eludes me at this point, interim GM, who was the GM or interim GM with the Raiders last year, he came in, and the one move that they made was Jalen Phillips. Now, when you look at the move in essence for a third-round pick had to be made in the regard that he would have been an unrestricted free agent next year and you'd get nothing for him. And Jalen Phillips is a good player. He's never been a great player. I feel like looking at him, he has the ability to be a great player, but obviously he had injuries at Miami, concussions, came to the NFL, hard worker, good kid, does stuff in the community, met him at the Cancer Challenge a couple years ago, had 2 devastating knee injuries, ACL, came back this year, has been the leader in pressures, but not the leader in sacks. And then, of course, we had the Charger game where he literally could have ended it with 1 sack. He got there, he had, and just did not finish the deal. And what sucks about this is, yes, you had to do it. Yes, what sucks is you had to do it in the position you're in. So if you weren't in the position you were in, you wouldn't have to do it. Like, good teams aren't trading their good players. They're just not. Now, yes, it's a salary cap league. You can't keep everybody. There's decisions that have to make, and it's a cyclical thing. But what pisses you off about it is, I would venture to guess that the Eagles, who have a very good team, that ran the right way, obviously, Super Bowl champs last year. They've been in multiple in the last, whatever it is, 10 years or so. He's probably going to have a great run on a great team, on a great defense with, lo and behold, Vic Fangio, who all these Dolphins soft players and some of the fan base wanted to be gone 2 years ago, where he was a grumpy old man who had high standards, and a lot of the guys on this team, lo and behold, didn't like it because they're soft. He gets reunited with Jalen Phillips. They're probably going to go on a run, I'm sure. Maybe they win the Super Bowl, maybe they don't. I'm sure Phillips is going to play well, and then maybe they re-sign him. Maybe he's just a free agent. He'll go somewhere. I'm sure he'll do enough here, again, being on a good team and a good system with a good coach. And what pisses you off as a Dolphin fan is when you can already just tell the tale. How many really good Dolphin players were pretty good to really good here, because of the situation, got shipped off, went to the right situation, and dominated. I can go through a list a mile long. Wes Welker comes to mind. There's so many guys the Dolphins have had that just were not fits here and went and left and were really good fits. That's what pisses you off about that move of Jalen Phillips. He was the only move. Allegedly, they wanted to potentially, not to say they wanted to trade Waddle, but we're willing to do it, but we're only going to do it for a 1, which that's at least smart because he's making $11 million next year. There's zero reason to get rid of a guy at his level and his skill set who's only making $11 million next year, unless you're getting a number 1 pick. Minka was another one that was speculated. Same deal. You were probably getting a very high draft pick for him. Probably not really worth it at the end of the day. Chubb would have been the other one that we talked about from a money perspective. But again, teams are looking at the Dolphins and saying, you put them in bad contracts, so unless you're going to take some of the money on, we're also not going to give you a high enough pick. At this point, it's like, what's the point? You're going to pay him. He's going to be here. You shook him down last year for a contract. You'll shake him down next year potentially for a contract. And it's such a cluster in the mismanagement of money, the roster. It's just a disaster. And then when you look at the division, and we're going to get to the Bills in this game, the Bills are obviously who they are, winning the division, whatever is 6 times now it'll be. Or, them and the Patriots. The Patriots have rebuilt, 7-2, got their franchise guy, got their coach. We'll see where they end up. And then you got the Jets, who said, we're punting on the season. We weren't planning on trading Sauce Gardner, but we put him out there, and the Colts gave us 2 number 1 picks, which is a steep number for a guy who's very overrated, good player, but overrated player. And then Quinnen Williams, they get another draft pick for him. Now the Jets are loaded up. Now, they could screw it up. They've done it before. We've done it before. But when you look at this division, not only are you going to be, you'll probably be 3rd in the division because the Jets are going to probably bottom out. But the reality is they're all looking up to you. Meaning, I should say that in the reverse. In the regard of the Jets at least have a plan. Now they have whatever it is, 5 first-round picks in 2 years. They have a massive amount of cap space. The Bills are who they are. The Pats are who they are. And you're in this like no man's land. And then on top of all of it, McDaniel's still here. Basically, Ross didn't exactly say he's going to be here for the rest of the year, which I want to touch on. I've still said I believe he will be fired after the Commanders International game because they're going to get killed against the Bills. The Commanders game, who knows? They're struggling. You could beat them, whatever. Chances are he'll probably finish the season, but if they get killed against Buffalo and they lose to Washington, I could see Ross saying, okay, enough. It is such a disaster and a disgrace right now. And on top of it, you just don't know what the plan is. The Jets at least told you their plan. They said, hey, you know what? We got this talent that's definitely overrated. And those 2 guys are doing nothing for them right now. And they're certainly not going to be there to do anything for them when they get good because it's going to take them a year or 2. Why not get top dollar for them if we can? And you know what? They did. And that's what you didn't do. And that is a problem. Now, I want to talk, speaking of which, to a little bit of the future and the Tua contract situation. Now, again, it's hard to speculate on these things when we still have 8 games to play. There's a lot of factors that are going to come into play here again. You lean towards where Ross says McDaniel will be here, but again, you just don't know. You know, did anybody think Rear was going to get fired right off in the middle of the season, right before the trade deadline? Probably not, because it typically doesn't happen with GMs. But there was a lot of blood out there in the water and chum in the water, and Dolphin fans needed something, and Ross did it. But when it comes to McDaniel and the Tua contract, I'm going to tell you where I think it's lining up. And frankly, this is going to be counterintuitive of things that I've said in Fire McDaniel. I actually kind of hope this happens. I think it's a chance to happen. I don't think it's a certainty to happen. But here's the one certainty or the more than likely thing that I think will happen from a Tua perspective. And this is how it's linked with McDaniel. And what I actually kind of hope at this point. To me, when everybody sits there and Dolphin fans, who a lot of them are really stupid, say, just get rid of Tua. Like, okay, if you think Tua sucks and he's not that good and he's clearly not having a great year, leads the league in interceptions, he's got 15 touchdowns, 11 picks, he's obviously been off, the hip injury, I've talked about it ad nauseum. You have to understand the NFL salary cap. So if you're a Dolphin fan who says, cut Tua Tagovailoa at the end of the season, okay? You have 2, not only 1, massive cap hits for the next 2 years of north of 56 and about 50, I think it's 56 and 53 million per season, okay? The NFL salary cap right now is, I believe, it's a little under 300. It'll go up. Are you going to throw away $50 million of 3, whatever the number comes out to be when they redo it this year? And then on top of that, is a guy on your roster going to play a 17-game season? Is Quinn Ewers going to be the guy? Clearly, you'd go out and get a free agent. But when you look at the quarterbacks out there, the quarterbacks that are out there that are to be signed, they're all backups for a reason. Some of them are decent, and most of them are trash. And then you look at the draft, okay? This is not a good draft class. I'm not going to sit here and act like I watch a ton of college football and know every single thing about every single college quarterback. But what I can tell you is, in the little that I know, there's not this stud that everybody's like clamoring for. There's a handful of guys that people are like, I don't know if they've been in college long enough. Mendoza, maybe he's the best one. I don't know if they do enough. They haven't, the whole transfer portal. They're going from team to team. And then on top of it, you're probably going to be a top 5 pick, but you're not going to probably be 1, 2, or 3. The Jets are probably going to be 1 or 2. Saints, who you're going to play, are probably going to be 1 or 2. Obviously, you. You have, obviously, the Commanders with only a couple games and wins. You have the Cardinals. There's a handful of bad teams that you could probably see yourself being between, 3 to 7, right? Are you going to stretch at that for a quarterback of where maybe there's one or two who might be okay and might maybe be not even the franchise, might be just a good quarterback? To me, you're not. So what I honestly want to happen, and it's completely counterintuitive because I'm sick of Mike McDaniel and I think he sucks as a coach. And maybe that's a little strong. I do think he does some things, but overall, the culture, the discipline, the game management, and frankly, I don't want to say this has been his best year coaching because it hasn't been his best year coaching, but there's been certain games, his game plan, I think, has been good, but then it's just a matter of roster and just executing that has just been lackluster. To me, I'm coming back with Tua because the other aspect is if you make the coaching change, you pretty much are guaranteeing Tua's gone and you're going to eat the cap hit because the next coach, and if it's GM or if you go the interim GM route, they're not going to come here. You're not going to get a top-notch coach, and I don't even think there's that many of them out there right now, to come here and take on Tua. It's not going to happen. So, frankly, not to say I want to punt on 2026 because we've already punted on 2025, and that's been brutal enough. I want them to play out the string, and I frankly want them to play good enough football and maybe give you something in Tua and McDaniel. Win some games, let the chips fall where they may in the draft because, again, it's a crapshoot to draft. I don't think you could have 1, you could have 5, you could have 8. You can draft well anywhere in the first round and find talent. You can. Late talent, second round. Like, there's a lot of stuff there. They have now the extra third. They have another, I believe, a 3 that they got. I'm to the point where you keep Tua because you're not going to have the cap hit. You're going to obviously get another quarterback. You're probably not going to draft it in that first round, but you're going to probably, let's say you drafted it in the second round. You have viewers. You don't know what he's going to do. We're going to talk about that. And then you have free agency. And have some competition, have Tua here, and then you know that the following year, if it completely goes to shit, then you pull off the Band-Aid, you take the cap hit for that 1 year. But to deal with that number, he would literally have the biggest dead money cap hit, bigger than Russell Wilson. And the difference between the Dolphins and the Broncos and how the Broncos were able to turn it around to the point where they're now 8-2, and they're not even that good, and Bo Nix is okay, is they drafted and developed well in the 2 years, the year that they had Russell Wilson and then last year, and they're getting a lot out of those guys. So they absorbed the cap hit because they had enough young talent they didn't have to pay. We don't have that. That's not here. The young talent that's here, you have some here and there. Obviously, they're going to develop and they're going to do their thing. I don't think that's the route. So to me, I frankly hope that's the plan because you know where it's headed. And guess what? Maybe they surprise you and they actually do something next year with the extra cap money. Maybe they look at it and say, okay, yes, we did lose some games this year that we could have won. We didn't get blown out of every game. There's some ways that we can, kind of get some things back. I would much rather go that route than the complete obliteration with cap hit implications and dead money, and not only Tua, but there's a lot of other dead money that's already here. Teron Armstead, Jalen Ramsey, you have the Tyreek situation, you're going to have dead money. I would run it back, see where Tyreek's at, pay cut, Chubb, pay cut, Tua here, McDaniel, A-Chain's here, Waddle's here. We have the draft class from last year. Hopefully they can develop in the next second half of the season. You have another draft class. You have more draft capital. Maybe you can get even more draft capital somehow, some way, maybe in some trades. If you feel maybe you trade back in the first round. If you feel, your guy isn't there, there's ways to do it. And again, I'm not like on the campaign of save Mike McDaniel when I've been screaming to fire Mike McDaniel, but I'm trying to look at it rationally from every Dolphin fan saying, Tua sucks, get rid of him. Well, yeah, that's great. But guess what? He's making $10 million in the next 2 years. That's money that you can't spend. You might as well field the practice squad if that's the case. And that's not reality of life, and that's not going to get you where you want to go in the long run. Plus, quarterback, GM, coach. Could anybody tell me right now with conviction and confidence that those three people right now in 2025, going into 2026, are out there to save you for next year? To me, the answer is no. And you have a much better shot of all that stuff if it goes to shit again in 2027. And again, not saying punting on 2026, but you could theoretically make arguments based on what McDaniel, Tua, Tyreek, Waddle have done that you could bring that back with a change and a physicality to the offense as you continue to build the trenches like you did in last year's draft. That ultimately would be my plan for the Dolphins for next year. We'll see. Again, the 8 games is going to tell the tale on how they perform. If it becomes a complete cluster, they're probably going to make those moves. But I don't know yet. We're going to see. And it starts with the Bills. Now, this game with Buffalo. Buffalo is very interesting. I still feel just because it's going to be a nice swift kick in the balls are going to win the Super Bowl on top of all of this year. They have a big win against the Chiefs. The problem with this matchup, and it's so sad to have lost 7 in a row, 14 out of 16, or 15 out of 6, whatever the hell it is. They dominate us. Josh Allen's numbers are just absurd. And it's a bad matchup again. It's a bad matchup because they run the ball well. If they don't run the ball well, Allen can take off, even though he doesn't as much anymore because he's smartening up. And then if that's gone, he doesn't have the threats at receiver, but he's got 2 really good tight ends, and we cannot cover tight ends. So from a matchup perspective, it's a nightmare to think you're going to hold them under 30 points. And frankly, you've played a fairly decent defensive game in the Thursday night game in Buffalo. You just made the dumb mistakes. And then obviously Tua with the terrible interception at the end. It's a bad matchup. Now, on the offensive side, do I think the Dolphins could come out having that week of rest, preparation? Maybe they can kind of harbor some of that Atlanta game plan into this. Could they, maybe score a little bit? I don't think they can keep up. Could they score in the game? 20, 21, 24? Yes. Buffalo doesn't make a lot of mistakes. The only thing you hope for and think potentially is the Bills had that big game last week. They're up with KC, letdown spot, game next week with Tampa. But I mean, to me, they're well coached by McDermott. Allen can't stand the guy. I mean, if he was my quarterback, you'd love him to death. But when you watch him as a Dolphin fan, you can't stand him, and he's a good dude. It's just, you just can't stand the fact that nobody can stop him. They can't hit him. Like that, he's a guy that you could have had that Gase didn't want. That's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. Back in 2018, it's a bad matchup. And then from an injury perspective, defensively now, obviously you don't have Jalen Phillips. You traded away. Chop Robinson's going to be out. Concussion protocol. Rasul Douglas, I believe, is going to be doubtful for the game, so he's probably not playing. You just don't have enough horses from a defensive perspective, and you have some horses offensively. And then obviously the X factor in Tua. He's played very poorly against the Bills overall from a turnover perspective. And again, I know I can't allude it in any podcast. 2 years ago, season on the line, winner take all, division game, 3-game lead with 5 games to go, and you shit the bed and you lost whatever it was, 21-14 on that Sunday night that I am still not over 2 years later. Probably never will be, because it was the closest we had to a division title in a home playoff game in literally 25 years or whatever it's been. So that being said, is there a path to victory for the Dolphins? There is. I would give it probably less than 0.001%. You never know in this league. Game at home, obviously it's going to probably be more of a Bills home game than a Dolphins home game because the Dolphins fans are just, deader than dead. It's hard to get up for the games. I go to every game. I'm going to go good, bad, or ugly, but I'll be honest, it's not fun when you're going to walk in there as a 9.5 point favorite or underdog, against a juggernaut. But I will say the Bills have some holes defensively. They do. They're not dominant defensively. They're very good defensively, but they're not dominant. James Cook, running back, a little bit banged up. So is there a path to victory? Yes. The problem, and it's the same problem we've had in other games, the margin for error for the Dolphins is basically, I don't even want to say slim and none. It's more like none. Because the Bills are not going to beat themselves. I'm not going to say they're not going to make any mistakes, but they're not going to make really, really dumb mistakes. And they have a really good leader at quarterback who has learned in his development. I got to give him a hell of a lot of credit from what he was when he started to what he is today. He's evolved much, as you can say the same with Lamar Jackson, as that, prolific, passer, can run if he has to. But let's face facts. It's very interesting. Everybody wants to talk about the Bills. Oh, it's Josh Allen, Josh Allen, Josh Allen. The reality is it's Josh Allen, but it's not, oh, he's throwing the ball all over the yard and he's hitting all these wide receivers. The one big negative, and their GM took a lot of shit this week in the trade deadline, was that they didn't go out and get another weapon. Now, that might come back to bite them as we progress towards the Super Bowl. But they lean on the run game. They just do. They're a run-first team with an MVP quarterback. It's literally exactly what the Dolphins could be effective and what they were effective with in 2023, and everybody loses sight of it because you had the Tyreek Hill highlight reel and Jalen Waddle highlight reel. But the bottom line is the factor of that team that got them to the 11 wins, and obviously you had the bad loss and where you were at 8-3 and the Titans and the whole thing that I don't even want to get into because it's painful. The foundation of that team was the run game and the O-line playing very well, creating for Tua, creating play action. It's the same thing now that the Bills do. It's just the Bills don't have the over-the-top threat that we did back in 2023. But Allen is very smart, and he's not going to beat himself, and he's going to take what the defense gives you, and it plays into their coach. When it comes to coaching, I mean, Sean McDermott would run circles around McDaniels, every day and 9 times on Sunday. And he's going to, because that's just who he is as a coach. So, that being said, as we prepare for the 7-2 Bills at the 2-7 Dolphins, that is just brutal to say, to listen to, but it is where we are. So, that being said, Steve Gio's Miami Dolphin pick in the league where they play for pay. Bills at Dolphins, Hard Rock Stadium, 7-2 Bills leading the AFC East, or actually I guess they're technically behind the Patriots, at the 2-7, reeling, firing GMs, trading off assets, got their head up their ass Miami Dolphins. And the Bills are favored by 9.5. Over under is 50. 9.5 on the road as a favorite. That is hard to do. So my prediction, I'd love to sit here and say that 0.001% the Dolphins could come out and actually maybe pull off the miracle and win this game. But there is not a shot in heaven or hell that it is going to happen. The Bills are probably going to have some moments in the game where maybe the Dolphins are up. Again, they're coming off that big, outing with the Chiefs. The letdown. The Dolphins did have the extra time to prepare and heal and maybe game plan. So maybe in the beginning of the game, there's a little bit of a back and forth. But ultimately, the Bills are going to run away with this game. I think they're going to win this game 35-17. It'll feel fairly close in the beginning, maybe somewhat the way it did in Buffalo earlier in week 3 on the Thursday night game. But then they're just going to get into that second half where the Dolphins literally just completely collapse in the third quarter and do absolutely nothing. They're going to run the ball down the Dolphins' throat. They're going to get their tight ends involved. Tua will probably make a couple of costly mistakes, and we are going to be looking at a 2-8 Miami Dolphin team headed next week to Madrid, of all places. Poor Madrid that we got to send them the Dolphins at a 2-8 clip, reeling, and then we're all going to be wondering, because they're not going to fire McDaniel coming, going into that game. What will that game mean, and will Ross stick to his guns and keeping him for the rest of the year? But that being said, nothing would be sweeter than a Miami Dolphins upset against your division rival and a team that I cannot stand probably more than anybody, the Buffalo Bills. So let's go Dolphins. Let's actually take what we did in Atlanta potentially, bring it to this game. And to the Dolphin fans, I get it. I'm going to be kind of dead walking in there myself. Let's try and maybe bring the noise and bring the pain and, try and match what the Bills Mafia is going to do. Maybe have a good game. Maybe get the upset. Doubt it. Highly doubtful, but you never know. That's why they play the games. We will see you next week as we prepare for the Commanders in Madrid. Let's go, Fins.